Welcome to the Breakthrough Advisor Podcast. In this podcast, we inspire advisors with ideas and pathways to break through barriers and build a thriving retirement income business. We will interview innovative technology developers, business leaders, and successful advisors, then help you organize and execute these ideas to move your business forward.
Hello, this is Jack Martin. I serve as the virtual CMO for InsureMark. I want to welcome you to the Breakthrough Advisor Podcast. This is where we help advisors like yourselves take your practice to the next level, and we learn how to do that by reaching out to some of the industry's great thought leaders. Today, we've got Julie Littlechild, who a lot of you have probably read or followed over a career. She's been quite a leader. Julie, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, Jack, it's really great to be here. Appreciate it.
Yep. So how are things in Toronto?
Things are good. We're heading into fall. Time to get life back to a bit of normalcy. I always look forward to that.
Good. So I want to talk about what's cooking, in the laboratory in Toronto in a minute. But for starters, your firm's name is Absolute Engagement, and you've been committed to talking about client experience and engagement throughout most of your career. So help our listeners understand, as a level set, what's engagement? Is that a noun? Is it a verb? Is it both? Tell me what engagement means in the context of a financial advisor.
Yeah, well, I love that question because it's become very apparent to me that nobody has the same definition of what engagement is. And, to some extent, you could say, well, as long as you're trying to do better, that's not a big deal. But we're all about evidence and where we should focus our time and energy. So we've actually always had a very specific definition of engagement because we use it in the research. And it's clients who are very satisfied. So they're a 5 out of 5 with the relationship, but they've also say they've provided a referral in the last 12 months. So it's a very simple definition, but what it tells us is that it's a qualitatively different relationship. They feel great about it. You're doing great work, and then they're advocating on your behalf. So we want to understand more about who those clients are, but that's just a measurement. But you're absolutely right. The bigger part of engagement is how do you get there, right? So what are the drivers? And that becomes the verb part of it. How do I engage? So we've spent a lot of time in our research really trying to tease apart what the impact of that is, and happy to talk about that, and then what some of the drivers are as well.
So I come from a data-driven marketing perspective, and one of the things we look for is to engage new people. Okay, yep. So that's kind of top of the funnel stuff, right? Yep. And an advisor might imagine that, if I bring on a new client, if I create a new relationship, then that person is engaged with me, okay? But what I hear you saying is that's qualitatively different than what you're calling engagement.
It is, and that's, the challenge with this word is it can legitimately be used in so many different ways, right? So you're absolutely right. Someone is engaged with you because they've started working with you. We use it as a metric. So in the same way you might say a client is satisfied, a client perceives value. Some people use net promoter score. There's just, it's a measure of the depth and the quality of the relationship. And so that's where we start with engagement. And one of the big differentiators that we've been trying to really focus on is that there's a big difference between someone who's satisfied and someone who's engaged, right? We tend to be satisfied with satisfaction, right? In this industry, we tend to say, well, my clients aren't leaving. That's good. And they tell me they're satisfied with the relationship, and that's lovely, but it's table stakes, right? So we've just always been trying to understand what's the difference when someone says they're satisfied and when they're that engaged definition, as in they're a 5 out of 5 and they've provided referrals. What can we learn about the quality or the type of relationship that they've got in place?
So what I hear you saying is that there's an active component for the client to demonstrate engagement, and that is that they are referring to you. So are there other manifestations of getting to that? Is it as simple as they're 5 out of 5 and they are giving referrals? I mean, are there other things that are manifest out of that?
Well, yeah. So I think the more important part of this is that next level down where we're saying, okay, look, that's just a metric. That's just saying you've got a group of clients, I would guess somewhere in the 30 to 35% range, who are engaged by that definition. Then what we say is, okay, well, does it matter? Like, should we care about this? Right. And I think we should. So what we can see is that when clients are in that category, they have higher share of wallet, they have a lower flight risk, they tend not to worry about things like the markets as much. They focus more on the quality of advice, and they also feel more they're more likely to feel a higher sense of value relative to the fees that they pay. They're more likely to feel confident. There's all of these outcomes. So we say, okay, well, we've got a definition. We've got outcomes that we can ascribe to that definition. So it seems like a goal worth pursuing. But then the real question, which I think is sort of where you're going, is what do we do to drive that? Like, what's actually happening? And when we start to drive down to that level, we found a series of characteristics of the relationship that are really strongly correlated with engagement. So think of these as like the levers that you can pull, the things you should focus your time and attention on to drive engagement. And they really have a lot to do with the relationship, right? Much more so than the products or the services or even the service, as in how often maybe you connect with clients and that sort of thing. So I put them into a few categories. One is broadening the scope of the relationship. So what we've seen is that when clients are engaged, they're more likely to say they have a strong personal relationship with their advisor. And they're more likely to say that the advisor provides support beyond just insurance or, portfolio or plan, depending on the nature of the relationship. So that's kind of one thing. It's deeper, if you will, than the technical work that's being done. The other area is just the extent to which the advisor is incredibly client focused. So these clients will say, my advisor understands my financial goals. My advisor understands my life goals. My advisor takes the time to understand how I've been impacted by the uncertainties of the last few years proactively. My advisor takes the time to understand if anything has changed in my life and reflects that in the business. So it's almost like a separate category. And then the final category is around reviews. And so when engaged clients are much more likely to say, I'm deeply engaged in the review, and my partner or spouse is similarly deeply engaged in that review meeting. So they're getting something out of it more than just what's happened over the last year. So, that's what we tend to focus on, because those are the things that I think suggest, okay, there's some things that maybe we need to look at and maybe we need to do a little differently if we want to drive deeper engagement.
So you said a lot.
I know.
It's great. Let's unpack that a little bit. So I think at the top, what you said was there's a metric that says they've given you a referral, but also there's an ROI component that says you're getting referrals. So that would be indicative of an engaged client. And you said that there's a larger share of wallet. And we all know that clients have 3 to 7 different financial institutions holding some of their assets. And so you're getting more of that money, right? Yes. And then there's, less chance that they're going to bail on you during tough times, and they're not going to be as obsessed with watching markets fluctuate. So those are all components of an ROI for this process. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly right. There's the ROI for the business, and then there's the benefit to the client, right? Which I wouldn't put in an ROI category, but you could. And that is to say, clients tend to feel more confident about their financial future when they are engaged. They tend to say, my advisor provides great value relative to fees. So it's a different, I think I put it in the ROI bucket, but it's different.
Gotcha. So, and then the descriptors of from the clients that I heard you say were that the advisor understands me, he gets me better at a lot of different levels, not just my balance sheet, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
And so let's pause there for a second. So help me understand how you think advisors should attack that. I mean, what are some best practices, to demonstrate that or to be engaged? I mean, I like to think I'm a caring person, and I have clients that have been my clients since 1994.
Yeah.
I still manage assets, and so I think I know I do, because I'm now in the second and third generation of managing family funds.
Doing
So
something right.
yeah, I'm doing something right. So help our listeners understand how they get to that level.
Yeah. Well, and so you're describing something that I think is really important. First of all, that we're talking to an audience of people who really do great work in terms of building connection, right?
100%.
I think that's in your DNA. It's why you probably get into this industry in the first place. So I would never say, hey, you just need to connect more deeply with your clients. It's not, you're doing that. But what we're trying to focus on is, are there processes and tactics and tools that you can use to support that process, to make it more efficient, to ensure that you're delivering that connection across a larger range of clients? So, for example, where the opportunities, I think, show up is in how you can demonstrate leadership with your clients. So, let's take two examples. That can happen in the communications that you share with clients. So let's take an advisory firm who's got a great business, and quarterly they're sending, a market update, or they're sending a newsletter, or they're saying, they're just sending some content that probably everybody thinks is pretty good. Nobody sends it back, right? They think that's interesting. Well, I think to lean into this idea of engagement, I think we need to get increasingly hyper-personalized in the kinds of content we share. We need to share content that is a direct reflection of what clients are feeling, what their concerns are, and what their interests are. So when we think about the tactics and the process behind that, because that's not easy to do, right? That would be overwhelming if you think about trying to do that with large numbers of clients. Something as simple as saying, I'm going to have a process to invite input from my clients, to ask them about their interests in specific topics, and I would say financial and non-financial. And that's going to trigger a communication that reflects what they just told me. I say I'm interested in managing personal stress. I get an article from my advisor that says, hey, you mentioned you were interested in managing personal stress. I found this great article. So that's kind of, I think, what the future is holding for us, that we can use tools to just almost pour fuel on this natural ability to connect by ensuring that our communications are also connecting deeply. So that's kind of one example of what I would see in this category.
So some of our listeners have the luxury of working with a small number of clients, but I think most of them are dealing with 100 or 200, in that number, right?
Yeah.
So, what are you seeing advisors do in order to scale what you just described?
Well, there's different tools available, certainly, to help us do that. So the work that we do, for example, is all about, how do I identify those interests in the first place, right? So you could go to all clients and invite input in one fell swoop on what their core interests are. So I want to, focus on my health. I want to focus on stress. I want to focus on my business, whatever those things are. Again, they don't all have to be non-financial, but many do. So now you have a list of clients who told you they're interested in something. We can add that to the CRM. You can, add it to a HubSpot or a MailChimp or whatever kind of tools that you might use. And now you can provide segmented communications based on interests in a much more efficient way. So I mean, I think you're hitting at a reality here, which not everybody is thrilled about. And that is that in order to do this, we do have to think about the future. We do have to start using tools a little differently. It's really our only way forward. Otherwise, we're just reliant on old systems to make this happen, and it won't.
Got you. So is there still a place for, okay, so I get ask them a question, they tell you they're concerned or interested in X, and you reply with an article about X. Okay.
Right.
Is there also in the client experience, there also is a place for more broader communication, right? So if there are themes in the market, if there are themes about retirement or whatever that are a little bit more broadly based, then that fits. But what you're saying is supplement that, enhance that to get to that deeper relationship level, right?
Yeah, and I think you could almost look at it in three phases, which have increasing complexity. One is what you've described. There are themes that I think are going to be broadly of interest to anyone who's a client. So that is a mass communication, market updates, right? Like we've all been wondering what's going on. The next level would be a segmented approach. So now maybe what you're doing is segmenting clients based on age or life stage. You're still making some assumptions, but you could say, well, I'm going to send content related to defining a vision for your retirement to my segment who is this age and up. They didn't tell me they were interested in, but it's a reasonable assumption at that point. And then the next level, which I'm really describing, is we can get to a point where it's much more personalized. Mary told me she was interested in this, and therefore we're triggering a communication to Mary about that topic. So, we have this path which fits for everyone at some level. I would just say that the future, like if we're talking 5 years from now, I think we'll be going, oh yeah, well, personalization was the dominant theme in all of this.
Oh, sure. Yeah. And there are tools available. I mean, so
sure.
we're using AI and ML and, large content libraries to create a hyper-personalized experience in a different world, but that's not technology that's easily accessible to financial advisors today.
Exactly.
So that's a little bit different story. So I think you said that part of this, part of the key to enhancing the relationship comes to the reviews. So is it in the reviews where you really can demonstrate that personalization? Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah.
Or is that what you're finding? I'm sorry.
That's what we're finding. And that is, I would say, where we've been doing most of our thinking over the last period of time, because what was becoming quite apparent is, advisors, to their credit, again, understanding clients at a deep level, maybe taking the step of having a defined agenda, which is great, maybe sending that out to their clients in advance and saying, is there anything else you'd like to add? Better still, right? So we've made some progress in terms of making sure we're focusing on what's on the minds of clients. But what started to become very apparent to me. Now, let me back up a little. Look, our world has always been about conducting these big point in time surveys for advisory firms. So that becomes important because I just want to talk about a transition here. So often on those surveys, we would ask people how they were feeling. We have a client self-confidence index, for example, that we measure. We would be asking them, what their concerns are. And that's lovely. The problem is, if you did something like that, a week later, that data might be old. Because how I feel right this minute may be very different when I'm about to walk into your office and meet with you. So if you were reliant on that data, it wouldn't work, right? So we began to really evaluate. So we knew that reviews were important. We knew that spousal engagement, as everybody does, is important. And we knew that it wasn't happening maybe at the level that it could. And so what's been really fascinating, and we've been watching this in action, is the idea of inviting input from clients about how they're feeling and what they're concerned about, and gathering that input separately from spouses as they're booking their review meeting. So literally what you're doing is you're co-creating the agenda based on what's important. Now, what we've been trying to do is there's some limitations. Let's say, like, it would be very common. I don't know if this is something in your business where you'd say, like, is there anything, before we start, is there anything else you'd like to talk about, right? We all do that.
Yeah.
And sometimes it'll be very specific. Yeah, I've been wondering about X. And sometimes it's just, I don't know, like whatever you think we should talk about, let's talk about. But that's the human problem. Like in that moment, I don't know how to define what we should be talking about. But if you ask me a series of questions about how I'm feeling. Am I feeling in control? Do I feel confident about my goals? Am I concerned about my kid making good financial decisions? I can answer those questions quite easily. And you can use that to actually co-create the agenda. So it's almost like you're helping clients define what those issues are. And if you can do that before you meet, give people time to respond, give spouses time to actually discuss these things, all of a sudden, what was a good review meeting before becomes incredibly powerful now. And I think that's where we're going to start to see some of the change going forward.
Yeah, the challenge, at least with the families I've dealt with, is it is in that moment. So
Yes.
you're asking a question, you're trying to get a 360-degree view
Yeah.
of what's going on in their lives, and that's shaped by the circumstance of their drive from home to get to your office, right?
Yeah.
Snow, rain,
Right.
traffic, stock market report, pandemic, that shapes the answers that you get.
Yes.
So I love what you're saying about soliciting that in a formal way before they get in the car to come to see you, so that they can think about it and talk about it. I also love what you were saying about stimulating that conversation. So, and kind of guiding them in the way you think about it. Again, it's one thing to do that in the moment. And certainly that's what we do when we're asking them those questions about their aspects of their life and how they feel and so on. But it's another thing to give them time to reflect on that. So I love that idea.
Yeah, because it's like you could do that so skillfully, but I might not be able to respond. That's the problem.
Exactly.
Right. And so it's almost like the tool is to help your client help you help them.
Exactly. And you can't do if you're going to ask them there in your office a question, it's that answer is going to be more tightly defined than if they have the weekend to think about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So I love that.
Yeah, go ahead.
No. That's fine. So I see how that shapes reviews. So let's back up a couple steps in the journey. So how does this process impact how I find clients, or does it?
It can. So, well, let me clarify that. Certainly the focus of our work is more on how once you're meeting with a prospective client, for example, you set yourself apart. So we haven't spent a lot of time thinking about, well, I'm thinking of another idea here. Let me take that down two paths. One thing that I think, if you take what we just talked about and apply it to prospects. So imagine now you're meeting with a prospective client and you've invited input on what is fundamentally most important to them as a couple, and you've invited that separately, and you can use that to drive your conversation. So I think you are going to have a different conversation than they are having with any other advisor at that point. So I think there is a connection to growth in that way. There's also, though, and we have seen this over many years, a strong connection to growth through referrals. So that's really where the connection comes in. So imagine, for example, you are conducting a broad-based survey. Let's take it away from the client review option at the moment. And in that, you're asking clients if they've referred over the course of the last 12 months. What we're finding is 35-40% of clients are saying yes, and that advisors are meeting about 10% of those. They're not being referred well, effectively. And so we can go a little deeper. If we can ask clients if they've referred, and then if you also asked them if they did refer, what were the circumstances? If they didn't refer, why was that the case? All of a sudden, you have all of this fodder to have very comfortable, very respectful, very easy conversations about referrals with clients. So if you had said you referred, you were my client, and I hadn't met anyone, and I said, Jack, thanks so much for taking the time to complete this survey. I noticed that you referred, but we didn't actually meet anyone. I was just wondering if you could tell me more about the circumstances and how you think we could help. Right. All of a sudden you're saying, gosh, I can't believe like Bob didn't reach out to you because I thought you guys should meet and so there are these simple ways we can use input from clients to drive very targeted referral conversations.
So in a sense, you're holding the client accountable for you not getting the referral. Is that what you're saying?
Well, actually, but the thing is, all of that strategy comes back to understanding why people referred in the first place, right? Which we know from our research is all about helping their friend. It's only tangentially to help you grow your business. That's not their fundamental motivator. So if that's true, all you're really doing is making sure that they know you're there to help. And it's a very specific conversation, and they're going to be motivated to help their friend, not you in that moment, right? So that's where I think it becomes more comfortable.
Gotcha. What's on the minds of folks today? What's on the minds of clients? I mean, you see the data, right? It flows up. And so you've got the ability, on an anonymized basis to look at what's going on now in real time, as opposed to a snapshot, right? So what's percolating out there in the minds of people? And I think a lot of our listeners are focused on, the retirement space, right? On that 4 million people who are going to retire in the next year. And, that chunk of people who've retired in the last few years. Yeah. So what's on their minds?
So I love the idea of thinking about what's on their minds, first of all, because I think often as an industry, we tend to focus more on the basics, like how often do they want to meet? And do they want Zoom or in person? All of that's important. I mean, we need to understand that in order to deliver a good experience. But we go out every year and we talk to investors across the country. And we've been doing this every year. So over the last few years, as you can imagine, it's been really compelling and really important for us to understand how people are feeling and how that has changed from 2020 to 21 to 22. And, you mentioned the pre-retiree market. And to me, that is the area of most interest right now. So just to give you some perspective from what we saw in the data, if we honed in on depends how you define pre-retiree, but I'm going to look at what we call the juggle generation. It's the 45 to 54-year-olds, right? Their satisfaction is substantially lower with their advisor. Their net promoter score is substantially lower. Their loyalty is substantially lower. You can actually see a difference. And when you dig into that and try to understand why, that's where mindset comes in, because they're also much less confident about their financial futures. They tend to say they're concerned about a much wider range of things, but it makes sense, right? They're completely stuck in the middle. I get it. I'm there, right? Like you're between kids who aren't yet fully functional and work, which is very fully functional, and you're thinking about retirement. And so, I think we've got to pause a little, especially with this group, and really peel back the onion to understand what they're experiencing right now, because I think advisors can be such a powerful guide for them in thinking about these issues. So I'd say that's one thing. The other thing, and I'm not telling you anything you don't know here, but we can see from the data, is that the vision for retirement is shifting so substantially right now, right? We've got, and I think this is only going to increase because we see it with younger clients. This idea of I work full time and then that's it. I get the gold watch and I'm gone, right? This, but it's so true. And so we're seeing people struggling with defining what that's going to look like and what their vision is. We're seeing it a little even more with men than women. And so to me, this is the most remarkable opportunity for advisors to add value, because if you can navigate that with them, if you can be a guide with them through that, gosh, there's no greater gift.
That's powerful what you're saying, because we have these broader impressions of what they're thinking about, like how am I going to replace my paycheck, and how do I transition, what do I do about Social Security and healthcare, and we're super concerned with those financial issues. And what you're saying is that there's a whole layer of new emotional issues that are on these folks' minds, new stressors as well, right?
New stressors, new and a new vision. I do think there's been a fundamental shift as to what retirement can look like, right? And that's increasing. This idea that work is now optional. This idea that maybe I work less, maybe I work on my own terms, maybe I do charitable work, but it's a different view, right?
Yes.
I'm not getting the lawn chair out at that point, just sitting in it.
Right.
So,
Exactly.
that I think that's changing, but you're right. It's we saw some who are worried about, even within relationships, what's this going to be like when, like when we're home, right? These are real issues that if we're not addressing them or at least acknowledging them, I think we're doing our clients a disservice.
So I guess if I were starting a practice or wanted to grow a practice, what I'd be thinking about is how do I take those themes and now start to elicit where these prospects I'm targeting land on some spectrum around those issues, right?
Yeah, I mean, this to me is, if you're looking for an advisor, and wherever I am on social, on Google, talking to friends, if I see one that tells me about their designations and the range of services they provide, and that's interesting. And if I see one that says, this is what you might be feeling right now, I'm there, right? So I think understanding this mindset, I think, advisors do understand, like you hear this all the time, right? Again, I'm not telling you anything new, but then the challenge and the opportunity becomes then how do I translate that into outreach that will attract more clients to the business? But in my view, the idea that I can look at a business, look at the website, look at the social, look at whatever you send me, if it says, I hear you and I understand your needs, you've got me, right? It's all we want.
100%. 100%. And that's a battle we fight every day with financial advisors. Seriously, stop telling them what they can Google. Start connecting with them as people. So as we're wrapping up, tell me a little bit about, or tell our listeners a little bit about, what things, Julie's firm can do for them.
Yeah, for sure. So our focus is, in addition to doing this research and trying to study client experience and client engagement, our focus is on helping advisors gather the input from their clients that they need to inform the experience. So that takes the form sometimes of a survey that is done and driving results right down to client level to inform one-on-one conversations. But the bigger shift for us at the moment is through our absolute engagement engine. And that really is about real-time input, just like we were just talking about. Like, we say these things as if it's easy. Gather input before a meeting, compare, so we've actually built the infrastructure to support that because we just believe it's so important. So the engine is all about real-time, ongoing input at the right time with your clients.
So what does that mean? I as a financial advisor, sign up with absolute engagement. And so then I've got this, you're going to help me shape my experience around your data gathering tool set
yeah, we're focused really on that process. So if you were, for example, making full use of the entire engine, what that would mean is we are crafting a poll that you would invite a prospect to complete as your meeting. That would gather data separately from the client or prospective client and his or her spouse. It would pull that together into a single meeting agenda that you can share with the client and use in the meeting. So that would be one stage. So it's the infrastructure behind all of that to gather, ask the right questions, bring that together into reports, and then provide you with meeting notes to have a deeper conversation. Similarly, a new client, you can trigger polls 30 days after they've started with you to invite input to identify early warning issues. As a client, you can invite input prior to a review meeting from spouses or individuals and go through that process. So everything that we're doing is really about tailoring the questions you want to ask at which stage of the journey, and then providing an automated and easy way to do that.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So that's great. Hey, one final question.
Yeah.
So what are a couple things that our listeners would be surprised to learn Julie does when she's not at the office grinding data?
So I'm Canadian, that's it's the first thing most people don't know about me. I always joke that I'm the oldest mother of a young child because I have a 12-year-old and I have no right to at my age. But so my life is entirely filled with trying to run a business and do cool things in the business and develop new tools, and then just go out and pretend I'm young and chasing a 12-year-old around. That fills up my time. That's it.
I would say that's at least 2 full-time jobs.
That it does feel like 2 full-time jobs, but they're both pretty good.
Yep. Not a bad couple of gigs to have, right?
Exactly.
Awesome. Hey, folks, this has been Julie Littlechild with Absolute Engagement. She, I think, has really passed on some really valuable information to help us build better practices around client engagement. I hope you'll connect with Julie. Her website is at absoluteengagement.com. Super easy to connect with them. They'll do a great job of getting your practice pivoted into this richer client engagement mode. So thank you very much, Julie. You've been a great guest.
Thank you for listening to the Breakthrough Advisor podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of InsureMark. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only.